In a bleak, impoverished town, a lonely black widow opens her door one stormy night to find a young boy standing in the rain. He asks for nothing but $5,000, 0 cents, to save his dying mother. Moved by the desperation in his eyes, she helps without hesitation. 3 years later, the boy returns to repay the debt, and from that moment on, both their lives are changed forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The rain fell sideways that night, slicing through the air like 1,000 needles. Wind howled down the crooked streets of the forgotten town, rattling loose shutters, stirring trash in alleys, whistling through broken windows like lost souls calling for warmth. This was the kind of town you didn't find on a map. Hollow Creek, population barely clinging to 3 digits. Streetlights flickered and died before midnight. Everything else shut down even earlier. Except for her. A single yellow glow burned through the darkness, framed by warped glass and faded lettering. Martha's General Store. It wasn't much. A sagging roof, peeling blue paint, the scent of old wood and dust soaked into every crack. But it stood, stubborn and alive, because Martha Ellis still breathed. She sat near the back of the shop, hunched in her worn armchair beside a sputtering stove. 60 next spring, though the years had etched deeper lines than time alone could account for. Her skin, dark and weathered, held the stories of storms both literal and personal. Her fingers, gnarled from work and winter, cupped a chipped porcelain mug of tea that had long gone cold. Her hair, once thick and black, was now gray and pulled tight under a faded scarf. Her eyes, deep brown, slow blinking, sharp when they needed to be, stared into the fire, like it held the answer to a question she'd stopped asking years ago. The store had closed hours ago, but she hadn't gone upstairs. Sleep had become a quiet enemy, offering dreams she didn't want, and silence she couldn't bear. She sat by the stove because it reminded her of her father. How he'd rub his hands together and laugh, that low, gravelly laugh, before tossing in more kindling. That laugh was gone now, buried somewhere back in Georgia, along with her mother's lemon pies and the sound of gospel music on a Sunday morning. This town had taken everything else. They'd called her a lot of things here over the years: the crazy widow, the colored woman who married the wrong man, the fool who stayed. After her husband left and the gossip bloomed like mold across back fences, they stopped looking her in the eye, stopped trusting her, as if heartbreak were contagious. But Martha stayed, because when you've already lost everything, roots are all you have left. The wind picked up outside. A loose nail tapped against the front window in a slow, rhythmic knock, as if even the storm had grown lonely. Then came the real knock. At first it was gentle, 3 quiet taps against the front door, almost polite. She froze. It was well past midnight. She waited. Nothing. She shifted in her chair, reached for her cane, and stood slowly, bones protesting the motion. Her body moved like a memory, used to pain, familiar with weight. She walked to the front of the store, one slow step at a time. A second knock. Louder, faster. Her hand tightened around the cane. Her heart began to whisper warnings she'd learned to ignore. Children sometimes played pranks here, kicked the door and ran, whispered slurs and giggled. Once, someone had left a dead bird on her doorstep. But this knock was different. She stood at the door, hand hovering over the lock. "Who is it?" she called, voice rough with suspicion and something deeper, fear maybe, or something close to it. No answer. Only the wind and the rain. She turned the lock with a slow click, opened the door 3 inches. The cold reached in like fingers. And then she saw him. A child. Soaked to the bone, barefoot, no older than 9. A white boy, skin ghostly pale under the porch light, hair plastered to his forehead, shivering violently. His eyes locked on hers, wide, wild, and full of something more desperate than fear. She stepped back, startled. The boy didn't speak. Not yet. He just stood there, trembling in the storm, staring at the only light left in Hollow Creek. And Martha Ellis, for the first time in years, didn't know whether to step forward or slam the door shut. Fade to black. Rain slid off the boy's hair in thin streams, tracing along the curve of his cheek like tears he hadn't let fall. His shirt clung to his bony frame, too thin, too wet, and too cold for a night like this. He was shivering so hard it seemed to shake the air around him, and yet his voice, when it finally came, was steady, raw but clear. "Ma'am," he said, looking up at her with eyes too serious for someone so small, "can I borrow $5,000? The world seemed to pause. Even the wind held its breath. Martha blinked once, as if the boy's words had slid off her ears the wrong way. "What?" she whispered. His lips trembled. "I'll pay it back, I swear I will, but I need it tonight. My mom's real sick. She might die if she doesn't get help soon." Martha opened the door wider, light spilling out over the porch and onto his shaking form. He was maybe 8, maybe 9, though something in his eyes made him older. There was no mischief there, no childlike glint, only cold, fear, and something deeper, purpose. Her mind scrambled to make sense of it. Was this some twisted prank, another setup? But her heart had already started cracking. She stepped closer, her voice firm but low. "Where are your people, child? You walking out here all alone?" The boy shook his head hard, rain flying from his hair. "Ain't got nobody else. Just me and Mama. She's all I got. And I don't know what to do. I don't know who else to ask. I thought maybe—" His voice cracked. He bit his lip. His small fists clenched at his sides, and for a second he looked like he might run or collapse or vanish altogether. "If you don't believe me," he said suddenly, stepping forward into the light, "please just come with me. You'll see her. Please, ma'am. I ain't lying. I just can't lose her. Not tonight." Martha stared at him, chest tightening, her breath shallow. There was no script for this. No protocol for when a barefoot boy asked for thousands of dollars in the middle of a storm. But the desperation in his voice rang true in a way only the broken-hearted could recognize. She'd heard it once before, in her own voice, many years ago, begging someone to stay who had already chosen to leave. "I'm not lying," the boy repeated, softer now, as if losing faith in even his own hope. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned without a word and walked inside. The boy didn't follow. He stood there, small and soaked and shaking, watching the light flicker through the doorway. Then she returned. In her arms a thick coat, the smallest one she had in the back closet, stored since a customer left it behind 2 winters ago. She draped it over his shoulders, tugging the collar tight around his neck. It swallowed him, but he didn't complain. His eyes followed her every move like she might disappear too. She stepped behind the counter, opened a locked drawer and pulled out a small metal tin. Inside, her emergency cash. She counted out the bills with trembling fingers, barely thinking, barely breathing. $5,000. It was meant for the roof, the furnace, the winter ahead, but something deeper than logic moved her. She handed it to the boy. He looked at the money, then at her. "You don't have to trust me," he whispered, "but thank you." Martha crouched, her knees cracking in protest, and looked him in the eye. "I ain't worried about the money. I'm worried about you. Now tell me, where's your shoes?" The boy glanced down as if just realizing his own feet were bare and blue. "Didn't have time." "You can't walk like that, child. It's cold enough to steal your toes." "I'm okay," he said quickly. "I've walked farther." She reached out her hand. "Get on my back." He blinked, stunned. "I said climb on. You're half frozen, and I ain't letting you turn into ice before we even get there." But he stepped back, shook his head. "I can walk, really. I have to go fast. I know the way better." Then he turned and ran. Bare feet splashing through puddles, coat flapping like wings too heavy to lift. Martha followed, cane forgotten, boots splashing through mud, her heart racing, not from fear now, but from urgency. Every few yards the boy would look back. Not to slow down, not to speak, but just to check, to make sure she was still there. but fortunately, and she was. Under the storming sky, two shadows moved as one old, one young, both clinging to something unseen but real. The fragile thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to save a life. The rain hadn't let up, only softened into a dull curtain as they reached the end of the street, the very last edge of town where even the cracked pavement surrendered to dirt and gravel. The boy led the way, slipping through gaps between sheds and rusted fences, until they came upon a patch of land so forgotten it could have been invisible. There, beneath a sagging blue tarp strung between two dead trees, sat a makeshift shelter that could barely be called a home. Wooden crates held the tarp in place, weighed down by stones. Torn blankets served as walls, flapping in the wind. A single milk crate and a rusted oil lantern, long extinguished, were the only signs that someone had once tried to make it livable. Martha stopped cold. The wind cut through her coat, but she didn't move. The boy ducked under the tarp and disappeared inside. "Mama," he called, voice low but urgent. "Mama, I brought help." No answer. Martha followed, stooping under the makeshift entrance. Inside, the smell hit her first. Wet cloth, mildew, and something metallic underneath. A woman lay curled up beneath a mound of tattered clothes and plastic bags, her breathing shallow, her skin damp and pale with a gray tint that didn't belong on anyone still holding life. She looked barely 30. Her lips were cracked, her fingers trembled involuntarily, twitching against her chest like her body was still trying to fight, even if the mind had let go. Martha fell to her knees. "Lord above," she whispered, fingers hovering before she dared touch the woman's forehead. The boy, Jamie, she would learn later, watched her with wide, desperate eyes. "She didn't wake up today," he said quietly. "I gave her soup, but she wouldn't open her eyes. I tried everything." Martha reached into her coat pocket, hands steady now. She pulled out an old flip phone she barely used anymore, dialed 911, and pressed the speaker to her ear. The storm outside howled louder as she gave their location in a voice sharp with urgency. "Tell them it's bad," she added. "Tell them to come fast." When the line went dead, she turned to the boy. "We're going to get her help, you hear me? She's holding on, and so are we." He nodded, his lips pressed tight, trying to hold back tears, but his hands told the truth. They shook violently, fingers curled tight into the fabric of his coat. The ambulance came in a blur, flashing lights cutting through the dark like salvation itself. Two paramedics moved quickly, slipping under the tarp, assessing the woman with the urgency of practiced fear. Martha stepped back, pulling Jamie close to her side. On the ride to the hospital, the boy sat beside his mother on the gurney, still clutching her limp hand. Martha sat opposite, eyes locked on the two of them, her hand reaching out to rest gently over the boy's small wrist. He flinched at first, then let her. She didn't let go until they reached the ER. The hospital smelled like bleach and loneliness. White walls, white lights, white coats. Everything sterile, everything loud in the wrong ways. They wheeled the mother behind swinging double doors marked restricted access. Jamie tried to follow, but the nurse held him back with a soft, practiced firmness. Martha guided him gently to the waiting area, where the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like flies on a corpse. "Let's get you something warm," she said, gesturing toward the vending machines and the tiny cafeteria tucked down the hall. He hesitated. "I'm fine," he murmured. "I don't want nothing. Not now." "You haven't eaten, child. I can see it in your face." He looked up at her then, not angry, just tired. "Thank you, ma'am, really, but I don't want to eat yet. I want to wait. I want to eat with Mama, when she wakes up." Martha's throat tightened. There was something sacred in the way he said it, quiet and full of stubborn hope. She didn't argue. She just sat beside him, not touching, but near enough that he wouldn't feel alone. Time passed differently there. The minutes stretched and curled like smoke. Martha sat silent, fingers laced, eyes never leaving the hallway where the doctors had gone. The boy leaned forward in his chair, elbows on knees, head bowed like in prayer, but his eyes didn't close. 10 minutes later, a doctor appeared. Young, sharp-eyed, wearing scrubs that still smelled of the outside world. He looked between them, then walked slowly over. "She's stable," he said. "Severe exhaustion, malnourishment, lungs are irritated, but no infection yet. She'll need rest and nutrition, but she's going to be okay." Martha exhaled before she realized she'd been holding her breath. Jamie made a strange sound, part gasp, part sob, all relief. His shoulders sagged and he crumpled forward, head in his hands, not crying, just shaking. Martha reached out, rested her palm on his back, her hand warm and steady. "She's okay," she whispered. "You did good, baby. You got her here in time." He didn't answer, but after a moment he looked up and whispered back, "Thank you, ma'am. I couldn't have done it without you." That night she stayed. Not because she had to, not because anyone asked. She stayed because the boy didn't leave his mother's bedside. Not for water, not for food, not even to sit down. And she stayed because, in that quiet room lit only by a beeping monitor and the sound of someone finally breathing deep again, Martha Ellis realized she was no longer entirely alone. The sun rose slow that morning, casting thin golden light through gray clouds as if the storm had peeled away just enough to let the world breathe again. The hospital room still smelled like bleach, but in the quiet glow of morning it felt less sterile, more sacred. Jamie sat perched on the edge of the chair, eyes fixed on the woman sleeping beside him, and when her fingers twitched, just barely, he didn't breathe. Then her eyes fluttered open. "Mama?" His voice cracked in the stillness. The woman blinked once, twice, as if dragging herself back from somewhere far away, her lips parted. "Jamie?" In that moment the world narrowed into 3 heartbeats, the mother, the son, and the woman who had brought them through the night. Martha stood in the doorway, quiet and still, her hands folded over her stomach like in prayer. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Later that morning they left the hospital together, Jamie clutching the coat Martha had given him, his mother leaning gently on Martha's arm. She was too weak to walk fast, but she insisted on walking. They returned to Martha's house, the little general store that still smelled like cinnamon and old books. Martha made tea, laid out dry clothes, warmed up a pan of leftover stew she had frozen sometime last winter and forgotten about. The woman, Eliza, she finally introduced herself, sat on the couch in silence for a long time, her hand still occasionally reaching for Jamie, as if afraid he might vanish if she blinked. "I don't know how to thank you," she said at last, voice hoarse but clear. "For the money? For last night, for everything. I swear I'll pay you back, every penny. Just give me a little time." Martha waved her off with a soft grunt. "You pay me back when the world makes sense again, not a moment sooner." Eliza blinked, surprised. Martha didn't look at her. She stirred the tea slowly, watching the leaves dance. "I didn't give it expecting anything back. I gave it 'cause I know what it means to sit in the dark and think nobody's coming." There was a long pause. Then, like a dam breaking gently open, Eliza began to speak. She spoke of a husband who had loved her too fast and died too soon, barely 3 weeks after Jamie was born. A car crash. A knock on the door from a man in uniform. No job, no family nearby, just her and a baby who needed milk when she couldn't afford bread. One decision after another, one step at a time, until her world became what it was now. Cardboard walls and desperation. Martha listened without interrupting. Her fingers curled tight around the chipped mug in her hand. "You still have him?" she said finally, nodding toward the boy who now slept curled like a cat in the corner chair, dried and warm for the first time in days. "That's more than some folks ever get." "Me. I had my mama and daddy once. Then a man I shouldn't have married. Town never let me forget it either. They laughed when he left, like it was what I deserved. After that I stopped trying to fix things, just stayed put and faded into the wallpaper." Eliza's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't mean to bother you. I didn't mean to drag you into our mess." "You didn't drag me anywhere," Martha said, her voice gentle now. "You gave me a reason to open my door." They sat in silence for a moment, two women from different lives, bound now by survival, sorrow, and the fragile thread of understanding. Martha reached out and touched Eliza's hand. Eliza squeezed back. They didn't speak again for a while. By noon, Eliza insisted they needed to leave. Martha objected, offered the guest room upstairs, offered time to rest, food to stay strong. But Eliza shook her head, resolute even in her frailty. "You've done enough," she said, "more than anyone ever has." "I won't take more than what I already owe. We'll be okay, I promise." She hugged Martha tightly at the door, whispering something soft and hard to catch. Then Jamie hugged her too, small arms squeezing with all the strength he had, and then they were gone. Martha stood in the doorway long after they'd disappeared down the road, her hands hanging at her sides, her eyes scanning the mist as if some part of her feared, already, that she might never see them again. 3 years passed, and then, one night, the rain returned. The wind howled the same way it had that night, sharp, cold, aching. Martha sat in her chair, fire low, body slower than before. She didn't even flinch when the knock came, 3 slow taps, then 2 quicker ones. She stood, heart suddenly hammering again in the way it hadn't in a long time. She opened the door. There, soaked from the storm but standing tall, was Jamie. Not the little boy who had begged in the rain, a teen now. Lean, taller, face longer and more tired. His clothes were still worn, still too small, but clean. He clutched something in both hands, a paper envelope, soggy at the edges. "I'm sorry," he said, head bowed. "I'm sorry it took you so long. I told Mama I'd pay you back. I haven't forgotten." Martha felt the air leave her lungs. She reached forward and took the envelope. It was damp, but inside she could feel the edges of bills, small, wrinkled, real. She looked at him again, at the mud on his shoes, the stiffness in his posture, the way he couldn't meet her gaze. "You walkin' through this mess to hand me a few bills?" she said softly. He nodded. "I've been working since she passed. A year after we left. She got sick again, and we couldn't afford help. I tried to save her, but—" His voice caught, and he pressed his lips tight. "After that, I didn't have anywhere to go. I slept behind grocery stores, carried boxes for folks, picked up trash. I only ate what I had to. I saved the rest. I promised her I'd pay you back." Martha's hands trembled as she set the envelope on the table behind her. She reached for him, pulled him into her arms. And he broke. All the years, all the hunger, the loneliness, the quiet pain. He sobbed against her shoulder like a boy again, fists balled into the fabric of her coat, knees buckling. "It's all right," she whispered, stroking his back. "You did good, baby. You did just fine." He pulled away a little, wiping his face with his sleeve, turning as if to leave again. "Don't go," she said. He paused. "Jamie?" she said softly, voice catching in her throat. "You don't have to be alone anymore. If you want, if you're ready. Would you let me be your mama now?" He turned. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Then a sob broke free, and he rushed into her arms again, this time not out of debt or duty, but out of longing. "I would," he whispered through tears. "I would. I want that so much." Martha held him close, eyes closed tight, rain falling just beyond the door. And for the first time in decades, her house was not empty, it was full, with memory, with grief, with hope, with family. It took time to settle in. Martha had always thought the house was too small to hold anything more than her own shadow. But Jamie fit inside it, like he'd been meant to all along. His presence didn't clutter the space, it filled it. His footsteps were careful, his words soft, his silences never heavy. He moved like someone who still wasn't sure if the ground beneath him would hold. Martha gave him space, but not distance. She showed him how to tend the shelves in the store, how to balance the old cash drawer with its stubborn springs and creaky hinges, how to sweep in long, deliberate strokes like her daddy used to, how to greet the old men who bought cigarettes they weren't supposed to, and the single mothers who paid in coins counted from children's palms. Jamie listened, learned fast, always with a quiet nod and steady eyes. He started school that fall. Martha had to fight tooth and nail at the town office, tracking down paperwork, explaining her guardianship, demanding someone listen to a voice that had long since been ignored. In the end, she walked out with a schedule in one hand and a worn backpack in the other. Jamie was 15 by then, but they placed him with younger kids. He didn't complain. He sat at the back of the classroom, head down, notebooks clean, pencils worn to nubs from overuse. The teachers said he was polite, quiet, unusually focused. He always stayed behind to straighten chairs, pick up trash, ask questions. The other kids noticed he was older, sure, but Jamie never made himself bigger than them. He never laughed too loud, never talked about himself. He simply worked. In the afternoons, he came home and helped Martha stock shelves. Sometimes he'd hum low and tuneless while folding brown paper bags or writing prices on cans with a grease pencil. When customers asked if he was her grandson, she'd say, "He's mine, that's what he is," and Jamie would look down, lips pressed into a shy, crooked smile. At night, when the store was closed and the house quiet, Jamie would retreat to the small bedroom Martha had cleared out for him, walls still painted the pale blue of a boyhood long imagined, window cracked open to let in a whisper of wind. He kept a spiral notebook under his mattress. That was his journal. The pages held thoughts he never said aloud. About his mother. About hunger. About sleeping under bridges and counting stars to stay awake. But more than anything, they held dreams. He wrote about bones and blood pressure, about lungs and infections, about emergency rooms and the smell of iodine. He wrote about the night Martha found him and the sound of the monitor when his mother finally breathed easy again. He wrote about becoming a doctor, not just for the title, not for money, but because he'd seen what it meant when no one came. He'd lived the cost of being forgotten. He wrote, "No child should have to beg to save their parent. No parent should die because no one cared." He wrote that over and over. Martha never read his journal. She never asked to. But sometimes, late at night, she'd pass his room and see the light under the door, hear the scratch of pen against paper, and feel something fierce stir in her chest. Not pride, not exactly. Something deeper, like watching a tree you planted grow taller than the roof. They didn't speak much of what had come before. It wasn't denial, it was respect. The past stayed folded, tucked into the corners of their lives like a photo kept in a wallet. There, but not dwelled on. One evening, Jamie stood in the doorway of the kitchen while Martha stirred stew. He looked taller somehow, even just from the morning before. His voice cracked when he asked, "Can I help with dinner?" And she turned to him, ladle in hand, eyes soft. "Of course you can," she said, "but only if you wash your hands proper." He grinned, a real grin, crooked and boyish, and the house, for the first time in years, felt like it was holding something warm that wouldn't flicker out. Martha turned back to the stove, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. She never said it out loud, not then. But in the quiet between their words, she knew. He had saved her life too. The auditorium lights glowed soft and golden, bouncing off rows of black robes and polished shoes. Outside, the spring air stirred gentle breezes through blooming trees, but inside, the stillness was thick with pride, with nerves, with the weight of every sacrifice that had carried each graduate to this day. Among them stood a man slightly older than the rest, taller, broader at the shoulders, more weathered around the eyes. Jamie Ellis, 33 years old, dressed in the same gown as the students around him, yet different. His face bore the stories of nights too long, roads too rough, and a fire inside that had never gone out. When his name was called, the room erupted into applause. But not the kind of applause reserved for the brightest or most charming. It was deeper, fuller, laced with something earned. He stepped onto the stage with a quiet confidence, his posture upright, every step measured, his hands calm though his chest was thunder. He reached the podium and paused. For a moment he said nothing, eyes scanning the audience, scanning the past. Then his voice broke through the hush, firm, low, and steady like the man he had become. "I'm supposed to talk about achievement," he began. "Grades. perseverance. The road we walked to get here, but that road wasn't paved for everyone. He took a breath. I want to tell you about two women. The first one gave me life, my mother. She worked herself sick just to keep me fed, to keep a roof, what little we had, over our heads. She died when I was still a boy, but she died believing I'd grow into someone kind. He swallowed hard. The second woman saved that life. She didn't have to. She didn't know me. But one night, in the pouring rain, she opened her door to a barefoot kid asking for $5,000, and instead of closing it, she gave me her last dollar, her warmest coat, and a home. There wasn't a sound in the room, not a cough, not a shuffle, just breath held still. I call them both Mama, he continued, because I carry both in me. Their faith is my foundation. Their faith is my foundation. Then he turned, slowly, and looked toward the front row. Would Martha Ellis please come to the stage? There was a pause, a collective intake of air, as the crowd turned. From the front row, an old woman rose. Her hair was silver now, wrapped in a neat bun, and her frame had shrunk with the years, but her eyes still burned with the same quiet fire. She clutched the edge of the pew for balance, and when she stepped forward, Jamie descended the stage steps to meet her halfway. He took her hand, helped her up. Side by side now, mother and son. From under his arm, Jamie lifted his graduation cap. Then gently he placed it on her head. It sat too big, tilted slightly, and she laughed. A soft, choked sound that carried to the back of the room. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. They stood there, wrapped in a long, unbroken hug, and the auditorium rose in silence, first a few, then the rest, standing to honor not just achievement, but something older, rarer, grace. Later that year, in a small town nestled between weathered hills and broken fences, a new clinic opened its doors. The walls were modest, the floors still smelled of fresh paint, but the people came in droves, those who had nothing, who had given up on being seen. Over the door hung a sign, hand-painted, simple and true. Life given, life returned. Free Clinic of Hollow Creek. And beneath it, in smaller print, barely visible unless you paused to really look, giving second chances. Because I was once given mine. Inside, Jamie moved from room to room in a white coat that hung just a little loose at the shoulders. Clipboard in hand, voice warm, calm, steady. And at the front desk sat Martha, older now, slower but still sharp as ever, her hands folding patient charts, her eyes watching the door like she always had, ready to open it for the next soul brave enough to knock. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.